Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Kimberley City Council. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. So first, I'd like to recognize the Tanaka homelands that we are meeting here and working on, and ask if there are any late items to add to the agenda.
There is no late items, Mrs. Acting Mayor.
Ms. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, do we have a mover to move the agenda? Okay, a seconder. Thank you. All in favor?
So, excuse me, who seconded? Okay, thank you. And Meg,
There's a lot of feedback. Thank you. So we have two items, two reports on the agenda this evening. And so with this, I'll go right over to Will for the emergency management program update. Thanks, Will.
About to talk a lot. Bear with me. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. The reason, or this report is intended to inform council and the community of the city's current emergency management program. The report will generate discussion on the topics of organizational structure, emergency management projects, past, present, and future, council's role in the event of an emergency, staff's roles and responsibilities, and the East Kootenay Emergency Management Program. The Emergency Management Committee identified the need to update council regarding the changes to the Emergency Program Act. The new Emergency Disaster and Management Act came into force on November 8th, 2023, replacing that Emergency Program Act. Further to the Act's changes, the city hired a consultant in the last quarter of 2023 to complete a gap analysis and roadmap on the emergency management program to meet the new requirements of the Act. The consultants completed the project near the end of the first quarter of 2024. The Emergency Program Management Committee has met 6 times in 2024. Post 2024 wildfire season, staff identified fall 2024 as the appropriate time to bring forward the changes to the Act and update the council on the work completed by staff and the upcoming emergency management program projects. So we'll dive into the presentation. So what is emergency management? It's the term used to describe the system and process preventing and mitigating, preparing for, responding to, and recovering from emergencies and disasters. Emergency management is broken down into 4 phases. As we look at the 4 phases, we have prevention and mitigation, work to prevent emergencies from happening and reducing the impacts when they do occur. The preparedness phase, ensuring applicable services and sites have an effective response plan in place. The response phase, coordinating activities when an emergency takes place. Recovery, actions to return to as close to a pre-emergency state as possible and potentially build back better than that pre-emergency phase. The Emergency Disaster Management Act, the new Emergency Disaster Management Act, also referred to as EDMA, came into force again on November 8th, 2023, replacing the Emergency Program Act. The Act and related regulations govern how to manage these emergencies in BC. The regulations of the Act are being phased into the legislation. So we don't actually have all the information yet. It's happening, it's coming. We're watching and seeing what's happening as it comes. Changes to the Act include all 4 phases of emergency management. So historically, only the response and a portion of recovery was captured in the Act, but now we have all 4 phases of those 4 phases captured in the Act. Co-management. The province has given a name to what many local authorities and regional districts have built. We, as a multi-jurisdictional emergency management organization, and in that it speaks to co-management portions of the emergency programs. It helps us answer the question of how do we manage emergencies together as different local authorities. Guiding principles. So what this speaks to is practicing disaster risk reduction, acknowledging and respecting the authority of all decision makers, working towards harmonization and coordination, collaborating on matters of mutual interest, recognizing the importance of investing in measures to reduce risk and promoting resiliency, recognizing that the relationship between promoting cultural safety, relationship between climate change and increasing hazard in emergencies, promoting cultural safety, recognizing the law-making authority of the Indigenous peoples, and recognizing the importance of Indigenous advice, input, and stewardship. All of society, cultural safety, disproportionate impacts. Roles of the Indigenous people. So it speaks to the roles of the Indigenous people, promoting cultural safety, like actors, representing critical infrastructure owners, volunteers to be addressed, and considerations of how emergencies affect people differently of each disproportionate. Climate change considerations, requirements in preparing or reviving risk assessments, and that it will affect emergency management plans in the future. Do you want to go back one slide? So I'll just speak to one of these pieces on this slide, is the updated definition of emergency. So it will expressly speak to transmissible diseases, environmental toxins, rioting, security threats, and terrorist activity. Will include impacts to objects or sites of heritage value when they require protection from the conditions that given risk to an emergency. Also, it's given us improved tools for response and recovery. It speaks more to the Indigenous governing bodies and more accountability and transparency between local governments and the provincial government. So the city has multiple committees and agencies looking after the emergency management lens. We can see at the regional level, we have the REOC, the East Kootenay Emergency Management Program. Strategic level, we have the Departmental Operations Center, that's your city staff. The Emergency Program Management Committee, again, that's your senior staff, just looking at a different lens and a different phase of emergency management. We have the Emergency Program Coordinator, kind of herding everybody along as we go. And then the Emergency Management Committee, which is the policy group, which is you. Site level, we have our operational departments like Public Works, Parks and Facilities, and the Fire Department. Just think of boots on the ground when we think site level. So within that regional emergency operations center and the East Kootenay Emergency Management Program, this is maintained by the and chaired by the RDK and the Protective Services team and other regional district members. So it's based on capacity fluctuations provided by other local authorities and local governments to step in and help when there is an emergency, to upgrade and then lessen when the emergency decreases. So included that is Kimberly Cranbrook, Fernie, Acom, Elkford, and several others around the area. So. The East Kootenay Emergency Management Program is basically from Radium Hot Springs south to the border, all authorities to Cranbrook on that side, and that's who gets captured in that emergency management, East Kootenay Emergency Management Program. So each one of those groups and committees I spoke to fits in different parts of the phases of emergency management. So I'm just going to speak to the phases of that emergency management, and you can take a look and see who's actually acting in that phase. So under preparedness, we have response and recovery planning, resource knowledge, prompting awareness, reviewing plans, personnel training, and exercising those emergency management plans. Within the response phase, we have messaging, declaring local states of emergency, managing business continuity, activating regional EOCs, supporting local authorities with mapping and messaging, resource procurement, and supporting that site level upgrade. Within the recovery phase, we have a focus on restoring physical, social, and economic conditions to normal pre-disaster levels, doing building and damage assessments, environmental impact recovery, and economic rebound. Under the prevention and mitigation phase, this is big picture, long-term planning. Looking at development and land use strategies, education of hazards and infrastructure improvements, and fuels management, which falls under that piece as well too. So, City Council's role. I'm going to refer to you as the Executive Emergency Management Committee as well as the policy group. I'm going to use those interchangeably throughout the night, but if I say either one of those, that's who I'm speaking to. What's your role? So it's authorize the declaration and extension and rescindle of a local state of local emergency and evacuation orders, if they're to happen. Authorize the use of powers, emergency powers available under the Act as required, and to monitor those powers. Delegate powers available under the Act as required, and again, to monitor such powers. Establish any emergency policy and or bylaws necessary to facilitate the response to an emergency or disaster. Require an emergency program and plans to be prepared for the city respecting preparation for, response to, and recovery from an emergency or disaster. So how do we get prepared for an emergency? And I'm going to speak to this as the preparedness phase for the policy group. What you can do is ensure that you and your family are personally prepared for emergencies by talking about them before they happen. Maintain up-to-date contact lists so that in the event you need to get a hold of someone, you will be able to. Ensure you have registered for the Voyant Alert emergency notification system for your home, your recreational property if you have one, and for your family member's home or anyone else you might be concerned with in the event of emergency. Monitor weather forecasts and information emails from staff. Notify staff when you will be out of town. Keep your phone on you, including do not disturb considerations. And this really speaks to wildfire events because they are dynamic and they happen quickly. During the activation of the policy group, I expect a notification from the CAO. You're going to establish that policy group and meet at the designated area. Receives situation briefing from either the CAO or the Regional Emergency Operations Center director. And based on the situation briefing, you're going to provide authorization or request support from higher levels of government. Speaking to the response and recovery phase, this is a really big piece we need to do, and it's provide a caring and calm presence to your community, and it needs to be unified. Maintain regular communications again with your CAO. He's a pretty important person. Keep apprised of emergency event status by reviewing situation reports, which will come from staff, and media releases. Participate in policy group briefings and make policy decisions as required. Request assistance from higher levels of government as required. Authorize extensions and rescindals of state of local emergencies and or evacuation orders. Attend town hall meetings. Establish recovery priorities and policies as needed. As requested by the CAO, act as a spokesperson for the media interviews. This will primarily be the mayor or another designate. Don't go out and have your own message. Stick to the talking points. Participate in policy group after actions debriefs as required. So we can really look at what worked and what didn't work and then learn from that. Executive Emergency Management Committee. So this is what you've completed. It might not be you, it might be past council, it might be future council as well too, making this longer and longer. So we've identified the emergency program coordinator to actually have this mindful eye of what is going on in the emergency management program. We've adopted the emergency program bylaw. This gives us the authority to spend outside of spending authorities. Adoption of the, development of emergency program management committee. East Kootenay emergency management program involvement. This is all captured under the emergency program bylaw, and provide emergency management training for staff. And that can just be through approval of budgets. Yep.
Could I just clarify, please, Chief? It does say completed there. Is that in real time we have completed this, or we're expected to complete it?
We have completed this at this date.
Thank you.
I should say that more correct. You have completed this to this date. So the Emergency Program Management Committee, this is staff. And it consists mainly of senior staff. We bring in other staff members when necessary to discuss certain points. What this committee does is provide strategic direction and oversight to the emergency program coordinator. I need to know what to do. I need to have somebody guiding me on what to do as well too, bounce ideas off of. Develops and implements the emergency program and plans. Develops and implements the emergency program and plans. Provides ongoing assessments of hazard, risk, and vulnerabilities. Evaluates progress of the emergency program annually. Develops the annual strategic plan, including recommending emergency program priorities, specifying procedures for implementation, budget and resource requirements, maintains a training and exercise program as well. The fire chief, what does that guy do? Also the emergency program coordinator. So within all what's going on, I provide leadership and administration for the city's emergency management program, coordinate, supervise meetings of the emergency program management committee and any subcommittees or working groups, develop a strategic plan, action plans, and a budget, maintain all emergency plans and documents, make and amend practices and procedures, coordinate training and exercise program for members of the emergency program management committee and other city employees. I also represent the city in the East Kootenay Emergency Management Program. Emergency Program Management Committee. So 2024, what have we done? It's been a big year for this committee. And I say we conducted 6 meetings, that is a big number. It takes up a lot of time. So the Emergency Management Committee met 6 times in 2024. Having about a duration about 2 hours on each meeting. And within those meetings, the committee identified 81 action items, completing 44 of the items, 20 items remaining in progress. And the remaining 37 have been tabled for a later date. They've been captured, but just tabled. from those meetings, staff have walked away with a lot of work to complete before the next meeting. So it doesn't end at the meeting. It'll still eat up time on Chris's desk, my desk, or Maurice's desk. It doesn't end there. Completed action items include identifying minimum training courses for staff, engaging with tech to formalize alternate access egress from town site, building guidance documents. In progress action items projects include ordering and distributing getting ready guides. You might have noticed them before. The master of disaster student kits and home emergency plan. So we have these now, we've ordered them. Now the fire department's going to disseminate them. We're going to go to the schools and we're going to get that out and distribute them. So engage with the regional district. The Emergency Program Management Committee met with the regional district to go over when to activate the EOC or the Emergency Operations Center and what they would provide and what they have provided other communities. Examples being the Fernie ammonia incident and the Acom St. Mary's River fire. And within those emergencies, they provided assistance with evacuation orders and mapping, messaging, talking points, emergency social services, by going to the actual reception centers and supporting residents to complete the paperwork that they needed to. Colliers project leaders, and I don't think I'm going to capture how big of a project this actually was. So we hired Colliers project leaders to identify gaps in the emergency management program to better align with the EDMA legislation right off the hop. The project included multiple meetings with myself and the corporate officer, all via Zoom and over again. It felt like we were doing a meeting every other week, Maurice. Colliers met with city management, so all the senior staff and managers as well too. They met with Kimberley RCMP, ACOM, and the regional district all on our behalf to find out where our emergency program was and the state. They figuring out how to align with the gaps. Sorry, I'm gonna just strike that. Fast forwarding to the completion, they engaged with a full day with senior managers to identify a roadmap. So based on what staff thought was most important, they put that into the actual building of our roadmap. And how we should strategically move on or forward. So again, I'll stress the point of we did this early. Some of my colleagues thought I was doing it a little bit too early, but this put us quite far ahead with the new legislation coming in.
No, could I?
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if we know population by neighborhood.
I don't have this on me, but Mackenzie actually has this and available. It's an internal document.
Okay.
So we definitely do have like a rough estimate of what it is. So we identified and applied for grant opportunities in line with the gap analysis, and we developed a new evacuation map and neighborhood breakdowns. Identified throughout the fire chiefs conference was smaller is better when evacuating. So we took that to heart and we're building it into our plans. Staff has compiled the documents that declare a local state of emergency and evacuation alerts and orders and rescinding with branding and messaging to them to streamline use, to streamline in the event of use. Pam and the committee are working on an emergency communication plan, also referred to as a crisis plan. The plan will have 3 layers speaking to pre, during, and post-crisis communications, as they will be essential for keeping the public informed and prepared at every stage of an emergency event. Evacuation planning. Staff online a new map attached to this report, as a new layer to the city's mapping website. So this is public. But we will be putting out a media release on this to say how we're going to use this and how residents should use this as well. We also be building an internal document for traffic management that the fire department, ops department, and RCMP will use to create logical flow of traffic in the event of evacuation. Business continuity planning or business continuity. Staff has started to compile critical information to keep the city running at minimal level in the event of emergency. We will be, it'll be a big step from the response phase to the recovery phase. This will make that transition easier. Collier's gap analysis. Not that I don't want to dive in this too deep, but Colliers is going to come speak to this. They're going to come and actually give the full breakdown of all this. They've identified 14 areas to work on, outlined with financial implications that are associated on the matrix. I'll speak to portions of what's been identified now. So co-management with the regional district of the East Kootenay. Collaborate with the RDK to navigate EDMA legislation and build an administrative bylaw to bring clarity to our relationship. Build a new administrative bylaw to consider all 4 phases of emergency management, including mitigation, preparation, emergencies, and recovery, so response and recovery. So we have the building blocks of a multi-jurisdictional emergency management organization with the RDK and all those members I listed off earlier in the area in the southeast. Training and leadership development. So invest in training as a priority preparedness item to be ready for an emergency. Work in cooperation with the RDK to participate in simulations and exercises. Add to resource sharing during regional emergencies. So right now we're working with tech to exercise an emergency plan. So we're going to do this in November with senior staff and find out how we're doing so far. We're not just working with just the RDK. And then resource sharing. One thing that really stuck in my head was it's a better away game. Let's not do this on our home ice. We're going to go to the RDK when they request support, and we're going to support them. We're not going to do it while we're in Kimberley, because then we'll be really focused on Kimberley. We're going to learn there. Consultation and cooperation with Indigenous governing bodies. Continue relationship building with ACOM to gain a better sense of community values, goals, and culture on the premise of trust and respect. Continue discussion with the RDK and establish a consolidated engagement or individual engagement approach for the Indigenous consultation and cooperation. Committees and bylaws. Reestablish and review membership of the Emergency Program Management Committee. Set up accountability structure to update the City of Kimberley Emergency Planning Committee terms of reference to align with EDMA. Review membership roles, responsibilities as assigned to City Council through the Executive Emergency Management Committee and align with EDMA. Authority and delegation. Review expenditure limits and set in place emergency and recovery limit based on responsibility during emergencies. With this, update related policies, procedures, and bylaws. Articulate reporting relationships relating to emergency management, City Council, the Chief Administrative Officer, Emergency Program Coordinator, and the RDK. So when something happens, we won't miss anything. All the information is getting back to the correct positions. Emergency management program and plan. Develop high-level piece that outlines the emergency management program and all its components. RDK relationship, committees, consultation plans, climate risk assessments, staffing, and training. Develop a comprehensive emergency management plan following the CSA standard and integrate emergency management and business continuity with detail on how to implement the program. Climate risk assessment. Collaborate with the RDK to undertake climate risk assessment. Look for synergies with mitigation planning and emissions reduction. Identify city-specific hazards, risk, and vulnerabilities. So this this grant's already been approved. It's gone to council. And between all parties, we are awarded 1.1 million. So what comes back is going to be pretty robust.
Well, could I ask a question?
Please.
I'm wondering how the city would go about participating in that, and like who would actually be participating, and how would the results of the assessment be communicated to the public? Is any of that kind of thought about at this point, or is it still far off in the
Some of
future?
that's been actually, I guess, communicated right now. Right now, we're still in the RFP phase that we're building this. So once it makes sense for the city, it's going to go out to tender, and then we're going to work with that actual consultant to figure all those questions out. Right now, we know that staff will probably have to put about a week aside to answer all these questions right now, but I don't know what like the whole picture of that's going to look like yet. So.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. With respect to climate change and doing a risk assessment, and risk assessments take a little bit of time. Do you have any idea of how often any policy or any of the criteria relating to climate change will get updated, like precip data and all that type of stuff? Just given the fact that, you know, the trend lines are changing pretty rapidly. Is it an annual thing or?
So with all the plans and what the Emergency Program Management Committee is supposed to be doing is reviewing all these plans and making sure they make sense annually. But that's something that if it's within the emergency management portfolio, that management committee is there to review them annually and make sure they keep making sense instead of getting old and stale.
Thank you for that information, Chief. A couple of spots in here, it's referred to the fact that it might be grant dependent. Are we aware of whether or not the province is putting aside a pot of money specifically for this kind of planning?
On some of it, they are. I can't speak to all aspects of what we're looking at, but we're trying to be innovative with every grant that comes out. And even though we could say our emergency management plan might not fall under this grant perfectly, we're still going to apply and see if we can get it captured in that route, and then work with the actual grant provider to get it to work in maybe not now, but in the future.
Chief, could I ask one more question? I'm wondering just around the climate risk assessment, would that be looking at hazards then as they relate to new development and then potentially being used to inform our land use planning as we go forward?
I'll just speak this much if Troy wants to add anything to it. So I think this is going to get captured in another portion of another plan. So we've also applied for our CWRP, and there are considerations to that in the DPA or development plan approval. So that hasn't come to staff yet. So Troy doesn't know about this yet, but it is always a consideration. And Troy and I are actually talking about this like in the background as well too. So it's going to be captured in some sense somewhere.
I don't think I have too much to add to that. I think the initial stages of this assessment is really focused on, you know, kind of existing infrastructure, existing community risks and hazards. But naturally that would inform future thinking about future development, that kind of stuff too. So there may be, you know, and probably would be other stages to that review, but I think initially we're probably looking more at the, like I said, infrastructure and community risks and stuff. Yep.
And I think a big thing too is a lot of these grants are coming up multi-year, or sorry, not multi-year, but year after year. And it's if we don't capture it this year and we identify we don't capture a piece, we can go back and really isolate it and then capture it in a different way. So it's learning from what we missed or haven't thought about yet, and then capturing it at another time. So.
So would that be like, given that it would be kind of iterative as you're moving forward and it gets picked up and then kind of transforms into something else in a different plan, would you see the community wildfire resilience plan as being kind of one of the first places that would be identified in terms of like DPAs and kind of
Yeah,
thing? Yeah?
it definitely is.
Is it-
It's the
okay.
first document where I've seen it captured on the newer plans that are being, I guess, mandated by the province to have in place to continue to apply for these grants. So it is being
Okay.
captured there.
Okay. And that's been underway for a while.
Yeah, the unfortunate part of the CWRP is that it needs approval by BCWS, and as we know, BCWS is not around for that portion of their job during the summer. They have different priorities and everything else, so it gets kind of put on the corner of their desk and picked back up when they return in the fall. So, and unfortunately, we are probably about 90% there this year in the spring, and then wildfire season hit. So we don't have that plan reviewed and I guess approved by EBCM and BCWS. So it's coming.
Okay.
It is coming.
Thank you. Mhm.
Move to critical infrastructure and asset management. So continue work already in motion by operations and planning teams. So the linear assets and strategic assets management plan. This will feed into the critical infrastructure plan required by EDMA. We'll continue to watch EDMA regulations for critical infrastructure to be released in 2025. Another plan is the Mark Creek Dam, critical piece of the infrastructure for the city. The last iteration of the emergency response plan was actually created in 2024. So. And all those plans will get fed into this critical infrastructure and asset management plan where we can know where they are and review them annually. Or whatever makes sense for the committee as well too. Business continuity plan. So it's been identified that we should have one and we'll work towards having one, but it's just development of a business continuity plan and integrate it within the emergency management plan. So the emergency management plan is the place where all these emergency plans are going to be kept, and they're just going to be appendixed into the actual emergency management plan, the business continuity plan. So it's a piece of this is that the city is applying a lens to, I don't know if this fits well here, but it's the city's applying a lens to the emergency management in all aspects. And we can look at the accessibility plan scope, and it's to include and identify all individuals with accessibility needs, which we can help to support them in the evacuation. So it's just capturing everything with that lens in emergency management and actually applying it in that sense. So this is what's going on. The next one, sorry, emergency management. This is what's going on in the background that council doesn't see. So this co-management with the RDK. We have a contractor already working on task. We're thinking a timeline will probably be at the end of February, I think was on that piece that we discussed with them today. Training leadership roles. So the EPC working with the RDK and tech on a tabletop exercise plan November 2024. That's just one little piece of that training and leadership role piece. Consult and cooperation with the Indigenous governing bodies. So the province gave us $45,000, and it's working with the COM on how they would like us to proceed. We haven't made any moves yet. There's been a lot of movement within management there. Committee and bylaws. This is again captured with that contractor. Again, they're working on task. The authority and delegation, what I spoke to, contractor was working on task. Emergency management program and plan. So this is massive, and it captures a lot of stuff. It's too general, but it captures a lot within that. And it's we've engaged with the disaster resiliency and innovation funding. So DRIF, this is that piece that doesn't fit in there as well as it should, but we put in an expression of interest and we haven't been declined yet. So we're moving forward with hopes that it gets captured under this. Climate risk assessment. So we've applied with the RDK for the disaster risk resiliency and climate adaptation grant funding stream. And we're completing an HRBA that's larger than an HRBA to capture that risk assessment piece as well too, or climate risk assessment piece. Asset management and critical infrastructure. Again, we put this in with that DRIF funding stream through an expression of interest, and the business continuity plan engaged through DRIF again as an expression of interest. So that's what we're working on right now in the back end of the in the fire hall that nobody gets to see. That's what we're working on. So Kimberley residents, and also your message to residents. What can I do to be more prepared? Download and sign up for Voyant Alert. Right now we're sitting about 2,000 residents registered, which is up from September 2023, which we were at 1,600. And then in March 2023, we are at 900. So we've seen a large increase, and it's Pam getting that message across and the RDK promoting it and doing those engagement pieces. Watch the city and regional district websites and social media for updates on local emergencies and emergency preparedness. Be prepared for those seasonal hazards that come in. Is wildfire season. Be prepared to have a go bag if we need to have a go bag and move to Cranbrook. It's flood season in Vancouver. Have your rubber ducks ready. Create a plan with your community, and that community is your friends, family, and neighborhood, and anyone else who's important to you. Don't leave anybody on the block behind. This is a big piece of that community. Look to fire smart principles when upgrading your home. Build that resiliency in your house. For residents to attend open houses. This is underutilized. We see this time and time again when we go over the fuels management projects. It doesn't get much uptake from residents. Steve and myself, Staff Sergeant Steve, are talking about doing an emergency management open house in the spring every year moving forward to speak to these pieces for the community. And again, get the residents out, get that message out for us.
Will, could I just make a comment there? I think if it was named something non-technical, like keeping the community safe from wildfire, it might pick up a lot more traction. I see like sometimes the titles come out and it sounds like kind of technical fuels management, and
Yeah, it's not always just that. Awesome. No, I'll take that in. I'll have my brand ambassador Pam get that one out.
One other thing that I've noticed in the West Kootenays is there's a presence at the farmers markets and stuff, which I see a lot of people stopping and talking, whether they have stuff to attract the kids, which brings the parents there, which is awesome for both parties. But over the past couple of years being in Caslo, they're set up every Saturday with the farmers market.
Yeah, no, this is definitely on my radar. I've been talking to Trevor under the prevention portfolio, and this is on his radar, like moving forward, is to get that capture we haven't got yet of those residents.
Yeah, right on. Thank you.
So I just want to, sorry, I haven't gotten the hang of it yet. I just wanted to ask one question, which is that, and this could be actually covered somewhere else or coming down the pipe, but I just want to make sure that in all of this, there is a plan to take care of you and Jim and Maurice and everyone is going, well, help me, help me, help me. And at the end of it, when the dust settles and like you get like the adrenaline is wore off and you get a chance to like put on your jammies and like relax and everything, that you're not like your state of being and your wellness isn't forgotten in all of that. Because that's one, and maybe, like I said, maybe it's an HR thing, maybe it's articulated somewhere else, but it's not in any of this. So I just want to make sure it doesn't get forgotten.
Yeah, no, I can definitely appreciate that. It's a big consideration when you're going to these conferences and everybody's discussing this burnout piece, and then getting addicted to adrenaline as well too, is to avoid that. But it's something we're always considering, and we're mindful of it. I'll say that. That's all I've got for today.
Okay, over to you, Jim.
Yeah, just jump in briefly here. Thanks for pulling that together, Will, and thanks. I know corporate services helped out quite a bit with that, so
Yep.
Appreciate their input as well. It's funny how quickly things like emergency management slip from our consciousness when it gets cool, wet outside. Not that emergencies can't happen at any time, but couple of months ago, I was going to bed every night thinking about wildfire, and now I've moved on to other things. But the intention of this was really just to kind of give council a picture of what's going on behind the scenes with emergency management work. With the exception of the budget allocations that council approves, you don't really get to see the kind of boots on the ground behind the scenes work that's going on. So I'd suggest there's a lot of good information in this report, so keep it somewhere where you can refer back to it when the season comes around again. And this isn't the end of it, as Will kind of alluded to. There will be more future presentations. We'll get Colliers in to present. They'll be able to answer a bunch more of council's questions on kind of the path going forward. But if you do have any questions on this, please bring them up. Our next presenter is actually presenting in Cranbrook at 7. So Mario from BDO, I suspect will be on his way soon, but we do have a bit of time here. So yeah, put Will on the spot here.
Over to you, Councillor Dunnebeck.
It's the one thing that you brought up for me that I haven't heard a lot of talking about is the fact that we have a pretty substantial amount of water above us in a tiny creek and a big flume. The one thing I've sort of always been concerned of is our big, beautiful bridges that we've had built, and if there's been any thought as to like, are these designed so that if there is a big wave, and this sounds like maybe I'm just thinking too deep here, but I just see a big wave coming in and those things set and sail down through town. I'm wondering if there's been any kind of like thought of like anchoring, or if they're designed to like sort of implode. I know Tyee builds very strong structural stuff. It just, with one being right at the headwater there, it's just something that I've thought about it, and yeah, concerned about the age of the dam, and like if we did have a atmospheric river that and something happened where the dam was to burst and the bridges were taken out. I don't know, just a thought. Seems extreme, but
Well, I'll take a first crack at it. I don't know if any of us are the best to speak to that, and we could probably dig in and get a bit more detail. But yeah, I think that was part of the planning and design of that project overall. Of course, was to improve the resiliency of the creek and the creek channel to be better than what we started with there. And that include the bridge design and designing those to be above a certain flood level. You know, that being said, crazy things are happening all around the world with weather events and changing conditions, and you know, that I think that's part of the ongoing work of the program here, is to make sure you know, we're you know, keeping an eye on what all of those changing hazards and risks are, and trying to ensure resiliency moving forward there. So but we could probably dig back and get a few more details about that more specifically if you'd like. But I think in general, that was certainly a key objective of that overall project for sure.
I know I don't really need for you guys to dive in anymore. It's just been something that I have thought about. I have looked at it from high up, and obviously with the time that I've spent at the Underground Mining Railroad, it's quite narrow at the top and opens up, and well, there's not much stay there. It's mostly overburden and stuff like that. So it just, yeah, I was just wondering if there is any kind of dam breakage plan versus fire.
Like we just do have that dam response plan right now in the event it does happen. That doesn't really speak to the prevention and like mitigation portion of everything, but I think with all these disasters and emergencies happening, we start thinking about how this will affect our community, and we haven't thought about this before. Like wildfire is a big piece for us, right? And now we have, I don't know, atmospheric river happening every 2 years. Yep, and this is where we start to think about like, how would this affect us, and we start thinking about it now. So it's that conversation piece.
Over to Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. How often do we get an assessment done of the dam? like a detailed assessment, and take a look, if we get any feedback that says we need to, do some things to help shore that up or reduce risk. Kind of what do we do in that regard?
I wish Nick was here for this one. I do wish Nick was here for this one.
Well, through regulations through the Canadian Dam Association, I think that like a periodic inspection, which would be a detailed inspection on a high head dam like that, is probably at least 5 every 10 years. So it's pretty frequent.
Yeah, I can tell council that a detailed assessment was completed this year. Nick has warned me that there'll be some budget requests coming forward to deal with some issues that were identified. Nothing too serious, but yeah, that assessment was completed this year.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm wondering about the business continuity plan and will it be in-house or by a consultant? And how will the businesses be engaged in that?
So that in-house and out-of-house consultant piece, like my dream is for a consultant to take this over. It's already going to be a increased workload to all staff that are going to be involved in the actual identification of what is necessary at that piece. So to put that back on the actual workload of the staff doing it as well too, it's going to be quite cumbersome. And then when we look at how it will come back to I guess to business owners and residents and all that, this is an in-house I guess task. It's not going to go out to residents. I think that's one of the pieces the chamber should be. I think they have done actual videos with the actual fire department that says this is what you're doing based around business continuity and everything else like that. So it's up for the actual business owner to build that plan for themselves. And I think that's part of that messaging that can come from the city is, hey, be mindful for economic rebound. You should have a business continuity plan in place. That's going to be super helpful to get back to the pre-disaster norm.
Great. Over to you, Jim.
Yeah, just for clarification, so the business continuity plan that we're talking about is ensuring that the city is able to carry on business in the event of a disaster if we're required to bug out a city hall. So things like we have offsite servers, for example. We're working on getting a cache of computer equipment located off premises so that if we have to relocate, we can set those up, tie into our off premises servers and carry on with business as usual in their different locations. So yeah, it's specific to the city.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
This is a question before your time, when I was in the back alley listening to everybody. Long ago, there was talk of transmitter tower to improve radio. I'll call it continuity for lack of a better term. In case of emergency, in case our internet goes down or lose our cell service and all as we have is radio. Did that ever go anywhere? Or did that just fall off? I remember very vividly the conversation about, or am I imagining this, Don?
Over to you,
Do you
Jim.
remember? No, you don't remember?
Yeah, I'm not entirely familiar with the conversation, but I do know that we have, just with advances in technology, some of our infrastructure that's located on the backside of the ski hill, for example, we have Starlink connection that
Okay.
provides internet feeds back to us. So there's various and assorted ways that we maintain connectivity.
So okay, awesome. Yeah, I just remember there was quite a conversation about something like that. Thanks.
Over to you, Councillor.
I just want to clarify one thing too. A dam would get inspected annually. It's just what I was talking about was the more detailed, the dam safety review. So I just wanted to clarify that. So
Over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I guess two things. First of all, further to what you asked, Kevin, back when we were looking at alternate sites for kind of point-to-point communication, we still had analog the fire department was still using analog radio communications. And so it needed that clear point-to-point communication, if I remember correctly, Will. That's all gone digital now, and kind of that landscape has changed. And I think the infrastructure is good infrastructure is in place to deal with that. I had a further question back on slide number 12. Pardon me. Back on slide number 12, with respect to the policy committee, executive emergency management committee, you referenced powers available under the act. Can you give us some examples of kind of what powers we're talking about?
And I'm going to speak to just to, I guess, the declaration being available to provide that, but not all of these powers and tools have been spoken about, so I don't want to dive too deep into that. But it's under those mitigation and preparation phases as well too. More to come on that. I don't have the answer for that one, Don.
Okay.
I'll get something for you on that though too.
Okay, thanks, Will.
Yeah, sorry.
I want to flag that that our fire chief Will and Bob Gray are taking over 60 students out tomorrow afternoon to talk about fire ecology and community safety, and then doing another tour the following afternoon. And so lots of opportunity to learn about fire ecology and community safety.
Yeah, well, just going over the Lois Creek prescribed burn and really talking about what we were looking for and what happened. It's going to be pretty interesting just to get that message out to the public. This is why we're doing this.
What do you, Councillor McBain?
I would suggest then the fire chief's been talking for an hour and he needs some sleep tonight if he's going to be out with students tomorrow.
Much appreciated.
So we Uber to
Just to
okay.
confirm, the mover, Council Denneback, and the seconder, Council McBain.
Okay, and with that, we'll welcome our guests. And all in favor? All in favor?
Thanks, Will.
You will. Okay, thank you. And so with that, we'll go over to our financial presentation with Mario Parodi, and welcome, Mario. And so we'll move forward there. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be here in person instead of just on a screen. So you guys know that I'm not AI. I am a real person. Sorry when you see a little bit standing here. I am a little bit heavier here than you would have expected. Exactly. If I may just ask a question, I didn't realize what the emergency management presentation was about, but have you discussed emergency policies for finance?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, to a certain extent, Mario. I mean, our procurement bylaws do allow for purchases or purchases outside of the financial plan in the event of an emergency. But yeah, part of the review that's being undertaken by Colliers is to look at all our bylaws and kind of beef them up. But
okay, perfect. And I bring that up under the context of, unfortunately, being in Kamloops, I've had some clients go through, some major disasters, and there's a lot of learnings that have come through, whether it's for school districts or for municipalities. So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that, because that would have been my first recommendation. Looking at the emergency powers, and in particular, establishing that chain of command so that your frontline people, obviously there's things that they need to do that they have to do right away, but getting them to shift from emergency mode into, okay, now we need to be orderly in terms of what we're going to be spending on in terms of recovery. That's the key, and that's where things tend to break down. So it's just understanding that transition. So I'll leave it with that. That's not what we're here to talk about, but I thought it was a timely comment to make. So, okay. So here to speak about financial management and, in terms of the responsibilities for elected officials. And do I have a clicker here? Or? Okay. Okay, fair enough. So then I'll just next slide it if I can, and we'll go from there. So, when I was speaking with Kristen, just talking about, I'm going to be here, I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to come in front of council. So you can ask me questions about this or about something else, but we thought that this would be a good opportunity to just, as we're heading into audit season and you're heading into budget season, to really take a step back and think about what your role as an elected official is in this process. And I hope that by going through this presentation that either tonight it stimulates some questions or it stimulates some discussions as you're going through that you might not have thought of previously. And so that's really what the goal of tonight is. Some of this will be repetition, some of this will be things that you've heard for the first time. But if we go to the next slide, what we're going to talk about is just first understanding, under the legislation, the responsibilities, delegation of authority, who's responsible for what. We'll do that at a high level because whether it's management, it's mayor and council, or, myself and my team, we all have different roles to play. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about the annual financial statements. We won't get into the annual report as much. And then just talking about some of the financial reporting concepts and some questions that I hope that you can be asking yourselves as you go through and read the financial statements. I know it's a big cumbersome document, but I'm also hoping that we can have, good discussion come May when I'm back for the final presentation. So this slide just starts with who does what and who's responsible for what. And really, I'm going to lump council and the audit committee here together because council has the responsibility under the community charter to exercise the powers and duty through council unless under another act. And the community charter does define that you are responsible for approving a budget. You're responsible for appointing the auditor. You're responsible for approving the annual financial statements. You're responsible for approving the annual report. And with those, it's not that the expectation is that you're preparing them, but you want to be able to make sure that you're asking questions and understanding and that there's good transparent reporting. You can delegate that function to an audit committee. The purpose of an audit committee is to have a subcommittee of council that can go and roll their sleeves up and take a deeper look. When I look at a council of this size, do we really need an audit committee, or is committee of the whole going to be good enough? That's something for you guys to understand, and with how everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, and so knowing, do we want to have everybody at the table? Do we want a smaller committee to be a little bit more focused and take deeper dives? But that's really the role of the audit committee, is to take that deeper dive. But again, when we're looking at a council of this size, we don't often see it. But I want to make sure that you understood what's there, because you want to look at your council composition and go, does that make sense? So your job is to oversee the process and make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing. The CAO, you have one employee, you know that. But the CAO's job is to make sure that the policies, programs, and other directions of councils are implemented, and they supervise the rest of the staff. And then we get to the financial officer. And the financial officer, there's a lot of focus on the CAO and their role, but it's understanding that the financial officer is a defined officer under the community charter, and there are certain duties that only the financial officer is responsible for doing under the supervision of the CAO, of course. But they are there to receive all the money, to make sure that the keeping of all the funds and securities are there, to make sure everything's been recorded, to make sure you're making good investment decisions, and to expend municipal money in a manner authorized by council through your budget bylaw, of course. And you want to make sure that the accurate records are being kept, and there's internal controls, because with the thousands of transactions that flow through Municipal Hall, you need to have a system that makes sure that it's all accurate, so that the information at the data entry level is being aggregated correctly, so that when it comes to the financial statements, you have accurate reporting. And when I say financial statements, it's the annual statements, but it's also the internal reporting that you're receiving as well. That's why you want to have internal controls. And so if we move to the next slide, when it comes to the overall, and this slide is more to do with the annual reporting, municipal staff is here to prepare the financial statements, including the notes and estimates and judgments that go into them. Yes, our team does help the actual drafting of the statements, but we're going through it with management. They're approving everything that's there, and they're making informed decisions to make sure that we're not just adding wording to it that doesn't make sense. That is their role, and there's a rigor around that. And then we talked about the maintaining of the system of internal controls. Your role is to provide oversight, making sure that you're reviewing the financial reporting, and then you're also looking at the disclosures and that explanations. And when I talk about disclosures, we focus on the financial statements, but I think it's important to remember the annual report. Both these documents are your chance to tell the story. And you want to make sure that you're happy with the product. And even though the financial statements go, that's the accountant's jobs, the statements can tell a story as well. So you want to make sure that you have that there. And then lastly, you're responsible for the relationship with the external auditor. That's why I'm here today. You know, I want to make sure that there's enough time that we're spending together that you're comfortable to be able to ask those questions and to be able to make sure that you're satisfied in the duty that we're performing. Oftentimes we refer to it as audit services. It's a statutory function that we're performing. And so I want to make sure that you're satisfied that that statutory function is being dealt with properly. Myself and my team, we're responsible for performing the audit. We report to you at a minimum twice a year, before we start the audit and at the end on the final reports. You know, and we want to make sure that we're reporting ahead of time so that if there's something that you've seen that you want us to pay attention to, we're able to do that. And we're also here to provide commentary on internal controls, best practices, because we do see a lot of other municipalities. We do have that ability to give that insight. Now, on the next slide, I kept this in here because really when we look at the external audit versus internal and performance audit. I'm sorry, can we jump to the next slide? Or are you guys seeing that? I have this in here because I'm focused on the left column, but there's this gray area that sometimes we're touching on the right column, or that's the expectation of what we're doing. And so I just want to go through the difference. So as your external auditor, we come in and we sample the transactions on a sample basis. We don't want to be sitting in Krista's office the entire year and seeing every check that she's signing off. So we come in, we do our sample testing, and based on our risk assessments, we determine where we have to spend more time testing. Our objective is to say, are the statements free from material misstatement? So are they accurate? It doesn't mean that they are to the penny perfect. We can't get there. It's cost prohibitive. But is it that, are they accurate enough that everyone can assess a true picture of how this city of Kimberley is performing? We provide suggestions on internal control, and we have to be independent, which is one of the hallmarks, because we have to be able to operate without worrying about what management thinks about us. We like having friends. Sometimes we aren't friends with our clients because that's part of the role that we have to do. Now, sorry.
Yeah. Is there a threshold? Thanks, Mariel. Is there a threshold above which transactions are automatically looked at?
Yes.
Because when you talk about random, there's a difference between, $500 and $5 million. I'm just wondering if there is a threshold on which you.
Yeah, so that's the concept that's called materiality. And so materiality is a number, and we determine it for your audit would be based on 2.5% to 3% of your annual revenue budget, the actuals in the end. We plan based on the budget. And so then anything above that number we would be looking at. And, it's an interesting part because when we look at capital projects, say, if we do testing based on the transactions, are we looking at it if you're laying a bunch of sewer pipe, are we looking at the individual conduit level, or are we looking at it at here's what the project is? And we default to look at the project to deal with it that way. But materiality, understanding we can't look at everything. We use that as a scoping. We use statistical modeling to say, how much testing do we have to do based on your risk profile to get to a 95% confidence interval is what we're doing. So that's this whole statistical theory behind it. And materiality is kind of, we look at the population relative to materiality, run our calculations to go, this is how much testing we do. But we do look at transactions below the threshold. We look at all the transactions above. And then we also use analytical procedures to determine the outliers. So it's not just random. We do have targeted items there as well. Now, when we switch to the internal and performance audit side, that's where you get into like the value for money type auditing, where somebody goes, okay, we've got a rec center, and am I charging enough? That's the question, you know, one of the questions we always get. And so we look at it, that's not really what we're doing. If you're out of line, we'll tell you, hey, we think this is out of line. But our job is to say, did you report all the revenue from the rec center that you collected? As opposed to, did you charge enough to get to the rec center? So a very important distinction. And really, when you're dealing with internal and performance audits, it comes down to that it can be conducted by external or internal auditors. So it's a little bit, you don't have that independence requirement when you're doing that. So on the next slide, we start to move into how do you provide oversight and what does that mean? And really, these next two slides are just giving you a bunch of questions that I haven't really customized. This is a presentation that I've run for many councils, and I try to give more color commentary to make it specific to you. But when we say, you know, do you have appropriate data to assess your organization's performance? When you get your quarterly reporting, when you get your budget book, when you get your annual financial statements, is it in a level that's too much detail, not enough detail? Equally as bad, depending on which way you go. So it's understanding that it's there and understanding that if it's not at the right level of detail, ask management why, and can it be changed to fit the needs of this 4-year mandate that you have here before you. So, you know, obviously you can't reinvent the wheel every time, but if there's tweaks that can be made, I think it's worth asking the question. Are you aware of the top organizational internal risks? We just talked about the risks of emergencies happening and the risks in there. That's what we're talking about here. When we talk about capital infrastructure, this council is well aware of the rising cost of capital in terms of another organizational risk. So, you know, stuff that you're already considering, but just put to, you know, this big picture question. That's what we're talking about here in terms of how you govern. How frequently do you get reported to on the city's internal controls? You have your former CFO, your current CFO in the room. Have you ever heard them use the term, so this is our internal controls and I'm reporting to you on it? Probably not. But when you get reports and they're referring to their policies, or this is the policy that we're following here, or we went to tender and we provide our procurement results and we're giving you that procurement reporting, that's them fulfilling the duty there. So when we talk about internal controls at this high level, often we get confused about what it is, but when you think about why are they referencing the policy or why are we talking about procurement, that's why, because they're demonstrating here's the internal controls in action. And so the question to you is if you get something that's being recommended and there isn't a policy attached to it, should there be?
Just to support our current CFO and our former CFO, they have used the term internal controls before. So,
well, I am impressed. You guys get the gold star. Normally, we don't hear that they've said it. It's usually done through action as opposed to that. So that's fantastic. Okay, so on the next slide, now we get into how do you know what questions to be asking? And it's understanding, like, do you have the knowledge of the risks facing the city of Kimberley? And you know, from the meetings that we've had in the past and what we've, you know, what I see of this presentation that you just had, even though we came at the tail end of it, you know, I think that this is a council that's active in that regard and is there. How frequently does management report to council about reputational risk areas? The fact that this presentation was happening, I think, says it all. So, you know, but it's important to know that it's there and it's important to know the red flags and know when to escalate, when not. And I saw some good discussion here coming in, even though it was at the end. So, you know, not too much more to talk about there. So now we're going to move into the annual financial reporting and really look at some questions. Okay. So if we go to the next slide, so why do we spend so much time? Accountants, we're just producing reports, right? But it's important to remember the objective of financial statements is to communicate information that's useful to council, to the citizens, and to your community, so that people can make good decisions about and assess you on how well you're stewarding the assets of the community, because they aren't yours, they're the community's assets. And so when we look at the purposes of the municipality, like we're providing good government, if we're giving good reporting, we're able to assess how our service levels are and, what's the value for money, even though, the audit's not talking about value for money, your financial statement should be able to tell you, okay, well, if this is, our budget on what we're providing on recreation services, we're spending this much, we're getting this. Is that good? And the statements can help you tell that story. And, it's also just fostering that economic, social, and well-being. It's all of this ties in, even though it's a little bit more numbers driven. And so the statements are there to give you that picture of the economic resources and a change in the resources year over year. Whether you're trying to build up your reserves because you have big capital projects, or we just finished a major capital project and our reserves have now gone down. Those are the types of things that the statements can tell you and give you that story of how you've been doing. So on the next page, we talk about in the first page on the financial statements, and it's management's responsibility for financial reporting. We've talked about a lot of the duties that we have in terms of, what everyone's role is in this room to play, but it's actually codified on the financial statements, and there's a page that tells the readers that it's there. And it's important, for everyone to read that and understand it because it really sets the table for what we're doing. The next slide just talks about the independent auditor's report. And again, I've touched on what the audit does, but there are 2 pages that you have in the financial statements that are really giving you that here's what the auditor does. And one of the important things to deal with, and it seems to be a bit of a problem outside of BC right now, is that the audit shouldn't be a qualified opinion. So what we mean by that is that sometimes we go, yes, these financial statements are free from material misstatement, except for this, or we couldn't audit that. And so we highlight and put that into a bucket over here and say, statements are good, except for that piece. That's problematic in BC because you all borrow through MFA. And MFA goes to the market in New York and sells debentures and says, look at all these high quality governments that get clean audit opinions every year. You don't want to be one of the ones that are going to be not contributing to that. And I say that because last year with asset retirement obligations, though, Alberta, tons of qualifications and late financial statements. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario all had that. BC had very few. I had one, but they had gone through a climate emergency. So until the recovery is done, there's no point in dealing with a new standard. But there's only one other one that I heard in the province this year. So now, questions when you get those annual statements and to really keep Krista and myself on our toes coming in May is, looking at these financial statements and you get this 25-page document, and is it reliable and understandable? And if it's not understandable, is there stuff that we should be changing in it to make it more understandable? Do you understand what the complex accounting and reporting issues are and non-routine or significant transactions? So last year when I presented in May, we talked about the asset retirement obligation standard, and we talked about it at length, both in the planning and in May, because that was a big, new, weird standard that put $12 million liability on your balance sheet. So we wanted to make sure that you guys understood that. The same point is going back to, the commentary about, what happens if we have major capital projects? Is that being captured in there? Is it there so that we can all understand it? Are you guys seeing that in the reporting? Again, very important for you to be looking at. Are there any big changes to the financial statements that are coming? We won't get into it now because it's late at night, but 3 years from now, there's going to be a big change in terms of the reporting framework. I think it's going to make the statements better. I rarely say that with the new accounting standards, but because I like my standards the way they are, but this one's going to be a good one. And again, is it highlighting the key operational risks for you? So on the next slide, we come into now when you're looking at, your net financial assets. Here's all the cash we have and cash coming in, less our liabilities. Are you comfortable with your net position in terms of what's quote unquote in the bank? Do you feel that it's enough given what your budget was, what your tax rate bylaw was, and do you have the resources available for future commitments? Your reserves. Are you satisfied that the reserves are growing to the place where they need to be, that you're having sufficient funding for capital projects, so you're not putting all the expenditures on debt or on the taxpayer? And then again, we all know where capital infrastructure costs have gone. I don't have to explain that to this council, but have you put enough in reserves? Have you done enough planning for what's coming up in terms of your critical infrastructure that needs to be replaced or repaired? So. And then the next slide really gets into, while this is a focus on the financial statements, I think as you're heading into budget season is questions you should be asking now, not waiting for the statements in May. And it's like, are you generating enough revenues to cover your expenses? When you look at, here's my budgeted revenues and the service levels, do we have that right mix in there? And I think that's, important to ask now and important to ask later. If you find that year over year, we're budgeting for, this much coming from recreation and we're getting this much, what's the disconnect? How are we going to adjust it? What are we going to be doing? And our spending. Last year when I looked at your statements, in a highly inflationary environment, you guys were tight to your budgets. What happens if you're not? And what questions are you going to ask, and understanding how it got there to make sure that it doesn't happen consistently? And do you understand the highest risks for not meeting budgets? Are there grants that you feel that you have to get in order to do that critical project that has to be done? What happens if you don't get that grant? What happens if capital projects or capital costs go up? What if there is, an atmospheric river that hits through here and then it does cause some flooding and we don't have enough, the insurance coverage isn't what we thought. Those are the types of things we want to be thinking about. Okay. I've spoken for probably about 20 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. This is really good. And it was just a commentary. I really wanted to say thank you for providing those last three slides on there. I think as a council, we do a pretty good job in general of keeping some of these things in the back of our mind, but having something laid out, with some of these detailed questions is a nice reference to have, because sometimes things happen and you lose sight of it. It's a good reminder to kind of ground us a little bit. So I just want to say I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just follow up on that, I want to be clear, because sometimes we come in and we do these presentations and we think there's a reason why we're doing it. That I've seen this council and I see how it performs, and this is more. It's always good to have those refreshers once in a while. That was really the purpose. So.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you. When our CAO was our treasurer, he came in at a time when I was about year 2 or year 3 of my tenure here on council, and another councillor and I sat through that treasurer's presentations, and he would look at me and I would look at him and say, oh my God, what was that? What are we trying to understand here? It was very difficult. And then he came. And he has put things in such a way that it is virtually impossible to not understand. He's able to put it in layman's language. He's able to put it into such a perspective that you have a sense that what we're doing is doable and what we're protecting ourselves is protected, and whether or not we have the reserves to handle it are there. And everything has been put to us so succinctly that it really makes it keep it simple, stupid for us. And I have to say as a banker that how much I appreciate that. And his protege here is following basically in the same way. And I'm very, very comfortable allowing their work to go through the audit process, because you're going to have to fight to find things wrong. And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, although challenge is always accepted when we get asked that.
Anyway, thank you, Mario.
Great, over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I forget the organization, but we kind of get this recognition annually for financial reporting. And if I remember correctly, an awful lot of this is what they cover. Are you doing this? You don't get the recognition if, you're leaving pieces out. And I think we've had about 3 or 4 consecutive years now where we have received that recognition. 5 years. It's been a while. Yeah, so that provides good comfort as well, that we've got a third party that is kind of riding herd over what we're doing, and we seem to be doing pretty good.
And if I may expand on that, so
Yeah,
the
please.
Government Finance Officers Association of North America, Kayla, who's here with us, is Government Finance Officers Association of BC. But just to make sure then, and you know, when we talk about this financial reporting excellence and the checklist that you go through, and I've adjudicated some of these before, what's important to remember is that the focus of those questions that we say, is this here or is it not? It's all about transparency and clarity. That is the focus of it on there. So while it's like, okay, it's great we received that reward, it's that we often forget why it's important to receive that, because you recognize that you're providing things in a clear and articulate manner.
Any further questions? No, with that, I'd like to call for a motion to receive the report. Do I have a mover, Jason, and a seconder? Councillor Fox. Thank
you.
Favor?
Move adjournment?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dunnebeck and Councillor McBain. Adjourned.
Vote.
All in favor?